Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 166 with 17-time Grammy Award-winning music producer and mixing engineer Mendy Portnoy. I had a great chat with Benny. We talked about so many things, including going to Berklee and then moving to LA, getting into the studio scene, having his in as an engineer by being willing to work on Latin records, working with great producers, analog versus digital and stereo width. We talk about panning, working with Santana, his approach to mixing, drums, percussion, low end, remembering to enjoy the moments while you're working, and everything in between. I really love this chat. I think you will too. So here's my conversation with Mendy Faccone coming up right here on Secret Sonics. Hey everyone. If you're anything like me, you often find yourself looking for business insight in podcasts. And I'm sure many of you are also into meditation and reflection to help better understand yourself. Former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, decided to launch a podcast that brings these two elements together. It's a series of guided self-reflection exercises, but specifically for freelance creatives like you and me, focusing on the struggles we face as we try to grow our businesses, while also finding more happiness in the work that we do. It's called Thanks for Thinking. It's definitely an unusual format, but if you want to grow your self-awareness, find deeper career satisfaction, and make more money, then I think this podcast might be for you. Experience it for yourself and click the link in the show notes below. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Mendy Faccone. Benny is a 17-time Grammy Award-winning audio and mixing engineer, having worked with the who's who of Latin music, such as Luis Miguel, Maná, Ricky Martin, Santana, Julio Iglesias, Barbra Streisand, Draco Rosa, and many, many, many more. Former guest of the show, Bobby Owsinski, recommended I reach out to Benny, who's graciously agreed to join me on the air. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Benny.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. I like that we pretend we haven't been schmoozing yet, but
yeah, nice to talk over the ocean there.
Yeah, like literally other side of the world.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
pretty crazy times. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story. I know that you're from Italy, and you told me a little bit about your background, but for the audience now, tell us a little bit about your story, how you got involved in music production, and how you got to be doing all the things that you've done and are still doing today.
Okay. Well, it's funny how fate kind of one little thing turns your whole world around, kind of a thing. So basically, I was always one of these frustrated musicians, who wanted to play, but I always thought I'd play organ and piano in bands. And when I was 13, 14, 15 years old. And then I was trying to, because I was always into music. I love music, grew up with the Beatles, Zeppelin, and all the stuff from the 60s. Yes, I'm that old. So with that kind of stuff.
I grew up on that stuff also. So,
well, a new generation. But what I really wanted to do, even though it was a stupid idea, I wanted to go to London and go to school at the Royal Academy of Music, which is crazy because I'm not that good a musician. And I didn't know how to read. And, for some reason, I was just naive and thinking what I wanted to do. But my main reason was to go to England because there were so many great bands that I wanted to be anything, even a roadie for Led Zeppelin. I didn't care. Just, be involved in that music explosion that was happening in the 60s and 70s, even though I loved the stuff that was happening in the late 70s, which was more like pop rock and, I hate to use the word disco, but very much like R&B, Barry White kind of stuff. And I was taking music courses at my community college kind of a thing. And a friend of mine who was a really good artist and introduced me to a lot of blues artists and that kind of stuff, he said, I'm going to Berklee College of Music. And I go, what's that? And it was one of those things that, man, it's just like I looked into it and I said, you know what, this is probably something that I can do more than the Royal Academy. On top of that, my father didn't have that kind of money, but so it was affordable. Ended up, got accepted to Berklee. And when I got there, the realization and the holy crap, these are great musicians. Back in 75, Gary Burton, Al Di Meola, these guys, Chick Corea, they were all there. And
Wow.
me as one of, I know how to play organ with like Santana songs. It's like, I'm never gonna make a living as an artist. But I got lucky the first year because I was in the composition program, not the performing program. You need to take electives. And one of the electives said, oh, engineering, that sounds easy, something to do. And at that point on, I just went in and I really liked it. And it was something that I could do because I wasn't more of a musician type. And on top of that, because I was a foreign student, the teacher, Joe Hostetter, who really started that program, and rest in peace, he passed away a few years ago, but he kind of helped me out and gave me like a job in the recording studio so I can help pay for my expenses and all that stuff. And I started getting teachers who'd kind of say, hey, if you get me into the studio, I can give you an A. So all of a sudden I was getting like these bribes kind of a thing. That's pretty cool. Long story short, I got into the engineering side. And once it was time to graduate, I was trying to figure out, okay, what's the next step? Because, you're in the university and you've got a whole, the world is in the university kind of thing. And so I thought about LA because that's when everything was happening down here. And my wife, who I met in Boston, she wanted to move to LA. We moved out here thinking, well, I'm from Berklee, whatever. I'm able to handle studios and all that stuff. And luckily, the networking at Berklee, somebody who was working at A&M got me an interview with the guy who was running the studio at A&M, which is now called Henson.
Mm-hmm.
And, the guy said, we just moved to LA. My wife and I, she was pregnant. My son was just born. I was working for like 3-4 months while I was looking for a job in a department store making $200 a week. And I finally got an interview and the guy said, I'll give you $75 a week, take it or leave it. And it's like one of those, you make that decision whether you want to look for a better job or you just you hope that this is the break that you need. And I took that job. Yeah, my son, who was like 2 weeks old, and anyway, you do what you have to do. But I got in, and little by little, I was getting raises. And the great thing back then, working for a really good studio, and Herb Alpert took care of his employees really well, that there was overtime. So I was able to make a living. For about 5 years, I was working there, where I started assisting on, bands like Supertramp, got to record with Barbra Streisand, Stevie Wonder, all these kind of things that Hollywood, was still things we're recording. And we did We Are the World. Then we did the rock and roll version. They call it We're Stars with Ronnie James Dio. So all this stuff was happening for about 6 years. And I was engineering certain things, assisting engineering. And out of luck in like 84, 85, when new music was coming in, for example, punk was coming in, and IRS Records, which was a subdivision of A&M where the Police were on. A lot of these punk bands were coming in, and all the engineers really didn't want to do that stuff. They wanted to do their main stuff. That this punk stuff was really bad. And Latin music was coming in also, and engineers didn't want to do it. And I said, hey, I'll do it. I'd rather engineer something than assist on something else. So I got to be like in the early works of it's a long story, trying to make it even longer.
No, this is awesome. I love it.
Just trying to be in, the ground floor of Latin music coming in. This is where I got to meet Maná, who at the time where they were called Sombrero Verde, they were still trying to get somewhere. I didn't, Ricky Martin was still not around, but a lot of top Latin artists were coming in because what happened was A&M decided to start a Latin label, A&M Discos. And what happened was when the Latin artist heard that, oh, there's a Latin label, because what happened before that, Latin records were distributed by American companies like CBS, RCA, and all these, and they didn't care about Latin records. But soon as a Latin label started to happen, this guy Jose Quintana, who was he basically started it out with A&M and Herb Alpert, big Latin artists would come in and want to record there. And I was the one who says, I'll do it. Nobody else wanted to, because the level between Latin artists, singers, and American were like this, right? So no problem. But we still got to record the great musicians, studio musicians. It was just when you put the vocals and that kind of stuff and the arrangements weren't as good, but it was a good learning experience.
Yeah.
So I got to work with a lot of, like, I don't know if you know, there's this guy Juan Gabriel, Roberto Carlos, Jose, who was like the Frank Sinatra of Latin America at the time. So all these people that I got to record, so I kind of got my reputation working on the Latin side, and I would get a lot of work, and that kind of gave me a career.
That's amazing.
You never know where it comes from, right?
Yeah.
And in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, I was like working day and night, which, I didn't want to, but it was a living, and working the studio process before home studios and all that. And I got to meet everybody of the who's who of on the Latin side. I didn't record with every single person, but you kind of, your name is out there, and that's what the important thing was, the name. And I do a lot of traveling because it was before internet and having your own place. I'd go to, Brazil, start to do Latin music.
Wow.
Argentina, Mexico a lot, Spain. So, that happened, which now is a different world. But that's how I kind of, long story, started.
That's a wild story.
Well,
yeah.
Lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you said, "Hey, I'm here. I'm ready to work," and so you did, and clearly your name and your reputation was really good. And I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Like, you have relationships with some of these artists for like decades. Like Maná, you've been working with them for how many years? Like more than 30, I think.
Since 1980, 85, 80. Yeah,
that's older than me. I'm born in 87, so that's 37 years.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that, it's funny how they started too, because they were from Guadalajara, Mexico, and they did this album with this producer guy from Mexico who was lucky enough to have his own studio. But they did this record that they played, that it wasn't even mixed or anything yet. And their very first hit was Rayando el Sol. I can't even pronounce Spanish music, but so they came up here, and I mixed like 4 or 5 of their songs. And Jose Quintana, who was starting the Latin label, signed them as on A&M Discos, because he really liked them. And in a way, he kind of discovered them in that sense. But, it wasn't like the record label pushed them or the whole deal. What they did back then was, because they were, a little well known in their town, their city of Guadalajara, I think they had some connections with radio stations. So they would go, like the old days, and please play my record. And from there, that record became popular, or whatever you want to call a hit. From there, it expanded to Mexico City, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it came up here. So they really did a lot of work in pushing their record. I was lucky enough to have it played in local stations that exploded.
Yeah. Well, I think that, you must maintain really good relationships with the people in the band and stuff if they want to keep working with you for that many years.
Well, it's funny. It's funny, but it's like, anything else. I was working with them until about 2003, 2004. Then, things happen. They want to change that kind of stuff, something different. But it's funny, but it's like you too. It's not about the people you have working with you to make the change. It's what you do internally in the band that makes the change. So they went with other people, and basically they kind of sounded the same, but without the sound that a mixer gives them, which is what I would do. So it's like trying to find something new, but unless the band wants to do something new, it's still the same sound with just different people. So that's what kind of they realized. I just got back to mixing a few songs with them this year. So we kind of like didn't work together since maybe 10 years, something like that. Same thing with Luis Miguel, that there's after about 10 years or so, it's not that getting comfortable, but I'm able to like try and give my opinions and stuff. And sometimes when artists get so big, they don't want opinions. They want you to say, yes, that's great, that's great, that's great. And if you say, no, I don't like it, they kind of want to go with their new circle of people that are kind of yes men.
Yeah, that's a big problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to push back, I think. I guess you have to know who the artist is and what they're going to say to you, and also what stage in your career you're at. But sometimes it's important to give that pushback.
Yeah.
But I guess I don't know if I'm implying too much that, like, I don't know, you must mean like your relationship must be really good with these people to have such long relationships and to work. Like, I don't know if you have like a secret to maintaining those kinds of long lasting relationships.
Well, at first I was naive thinking, because when you're working with a band, an artist, I was thinking it was also friendship, that, you're friends and they're going to take care of you, friends. But a lot of it is really, it's about business. You need them, they need you, kind of a thing. And that's where I turned it in. When I was working, I really made it personal, which makes it really hard to work, meaning it's kind of like hard to describe. But when you take it personal, my work, the things that I do, I worry that it has to be perfect, because my name, you put it out there. And while we're recording, while we're mixing, if things, when I'm thinking ahead, I'm mixing something and something doesn't feel right, I kind of, put my 2 cents in there, kind of.
Yeah.
And also everybody has their own sound whether you're mixing or whatever. So I had my own little part of the sound of what was happening. So we had our relationship, but when it came time to business, obviously business is business. And those are the kind of things that kind of put a wall in front, shall we say. But now it's become back to a friendship kind of a thing, because it's not about the work anymore, because I don't care. I'm old enough where, hey, it is what
You've
it
let
is.
go of that ego, the perfectionism,
Right.
Yeah, seems like a really healthy place to get. I hope to get there one day.
Well, you will when you're about 70 years old.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope by then.
Yeah.
Amazing. I saw that you worked with some of the great, at A&M, you worked with some of the great producers of all time, such as Quincy Jones. I don't know. Do you have any great stories or lessons that you took away from maybe working with him?
Well, yeah, there were a lot of artists, a lot of producers like David Foster, Quincy Jones, Phil Ramone, that will come in, and the most amazing thing that I've learned from them is that when they're producing a record and they're hiring a musician, they let that musician be creative, in the sense that when they come in, hey, like Paul Jackson Jr. or, any of the great studio players, he'd let them listen to the song and listen to their output in terms of creativity, what they come out part wise to play, even though they kind of direct them in the, in what they want with the music. The part really is a combination of what the producer is looking for, but what the artist, what the musician kind of gives them. So that being said, a lot of times, especially Quincy and Phil Ramone, they would come in, and even Jimmy Iovine, actually, when he took over A&M, they would come and literally listen to what's happening with what the artist is doing and kind of say, yeah, it's pretty good, maybe try this or that, and walk out. And the engineer and the musician would be the one that kind of maybe work out the part or get something better. And the producer, will come in sometimes. Now, there's some producers that stay in, but they would let the musician be creative and not. There's some producers that I work with. They come in with a lead sheet, and every single note they had to play, and it had to be what they want, which is okay, and they can do it. But that creative finding out, certain things that, instead of going from door number 1, you go to door number 2. That was what they made them do.
Yeah. That I love that. Yeah. It's. I find for me personally, when I'm working on a production, I'm a bass player, so as soon as I pick up a bass, it's gonna inspire me to do something and push things in a new direction, I think.
Right.
And also, when you have more than one musician working on a record,
right,
it just gets better and better with more musicians. So,
well, back then, if you needed a guitar player, if you needed a bass player, you would call a bass player and get their sense of, as a bass player. Today, if I needed a bass player, I'll get a keyboard player and play the bass part. I'm thinking about it as a bass player, right? And then if you do get a live bass player, they would have to play the part that they're hearing from the demo.
Yeah.
So it becomes very constrictive kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But again, for me, still going to somebody's home and working, that creative part is not the same. Like if I go to a studio, first of all, you do have the pressure, the money, the time, that whole thing, but it's a little more creative atmosphere than somebody's house. And it helps and hurts in, different ways. But there was something about going in a studio and being creative.
Yeah. I think it's like the time constraint. It's like, today's the day, it's happening, let's go. And like, it's like almost like that deadline that knocks it out the park,
Right. Well, I used to hate that fact, because I'd wake up in the morning and say, okay, I've got to get a song mixed today and it's got to be perfect. But there's no such thing. So, especially back to that, getting so personal with the music and taking it personal, is that I wanted it perfect by the end of the day. But if I was recording it, I would always worry that this sound or something is clashing a little bit, and how the hell do I mix it when the time comes to put it all together? So there was always that stress, of the whole project, that everything has to be right, and the better it is while you're recording, the easier it is to mix. But today you have no idea. Things get thrown at you, and then we're at home here, and I've got 3 days to do it. I'm not paying, they're not paying me studio time or whatever. For them, it's like, hey, whatever time it takes, so long as I don't have to pay extra for it, do whatever you want.
Yeah. It's an easier lifestyle now.
It is.
Yeah. Wait, so we got to get a little bit into the technical. I guess, you kind of mentioned to me before we started rolling that you're still an analog guy. What does your mixing setup look like these days?
Well, somebody said I'm stubborn, which I am. I grew up in analog consoles and the whole deal, and the beginning of automation with automated consoles. So that's where I kind of like, started out. When Pro Tools came in, the first one of the first projects I did on Pro Tools, where it was 16-bit 44.1, horrible converters, was the Ricky Martin Vuelve record, which was kind of successful, but it was so painful because I knew what analog sounded like, and I was fighting the Pro Tools, even though I was mixing on an analog Neve console. But when everybody started working in the box and things, plugins, that whole thing, it was hard. The sound wasn't coming from analog, exactly what we're looking for. Today, a combination of, it's gotten a lot better, but also we're used to this digital sound. So there's a combination of all this stuff. But I was always, I love to put my hands on it. And by putting my hands on a digital workstation is not the same. It doesn't have the same feel. And because of all that, analog consoles became cheaper. So I was able to, about 15 years ago, look for an analog console. And even though I didn't put it in my house, I rented a room, because obviously everybody needs to have their own place now. So I found this Trident.
Wow.
It's a Series B, I think. I don't remember. Series C. So basically, it's an extended version. Usually they're 32 inputs. This is a 48 input with a 24. See if I can get to it. 24 monitor returns, and it has automation. These are automated not flying faders. And if you see up here, this is the automated system. It's the the 900. Oh, I can't think of the name. That escapes me, but it'll come to me. So basically, everything I do, it's like it's all about feel here, and automation.
Yeah.
And obviously, I've got my Pro Tools screen. Let me see. I can't flip the camera, but I've got my. Let me unplug this and this. So I've got my Pro Tools. So basically, what I'm calling it, I work old school and new school. So my Pro Tools is a combination of tape machine, and I use plugins. I use a lot of plugins, but more for effects, for a certain compression if I don't have enough compressors. But the majority of my work, and including here, Trident is great sounding EQs. So I use Trident EQs. I've got a couple of 1073s that I use for vocals. And I've got a lot of outboard gear that I use. Wow. It's not, that much, but it's more than studio, more than home stuff. So what I get to do is I get Pro Tools and I lay it out on my console. So number one, it sounds so much better than in the box, and like that, that kind of sound where it's not opened up. I modified the console also. Right there, if you see right underneath the tannoys, I've got a modification on the console right there.
Yeah.
Inward connection. What he did was he bypassed all my center section, and it cleaned up the sound of the Trident also. And, I can hear down to 20 hertz, not that those speakers will, but the quality. And basically, when you're mixing with Pro Tools, the stereo imaging really is about 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. When you work on and now, even though it's funny because when you're hearing stereo and the imaging is right here, right? So you think it's 180 degrees. But when you're dealing with analog, it really is opened up a lot more. So you really have your 180 degrees that you're watching or listening to. Now, with that center section, it really gave me a lot more openness to it and depth. Like when you go to the really $300,000, SSLs or Neve consoles. I don't know if this is a good analogy, but it's like when you're watching TV, for example, and those old 60s commercials, where the pillar box, if you have a 65-inch TV, you're only watching about 40 inches of it because it's pillar. You don't get the full screen unless you stretch it. which
Yeah.
looks and sounds kind of weird, or looks weird. Then we came out with HDMI and 1080p, you get the full screen, and that's what basically is the difference between, to me, in stereo imaging, between
Yeah.
pillar and a real wide imaging. Now, sometimes you'll see movies that come from theaters, where the top and the bottom is like a little black. It's more like a cinemascope kind of a thing,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
right? So you're not using the full screen, even though you're watching the whole stereo TV. There's parts of it that's not wide, and that's what I get from this, is very much more wide, and I can hear. It's very, very transparent. My panning, so
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff that older engineers used to do, even though we try and make it sound good on iPhones and pods and stuff.
Right.
And I teach at Cal Lutheran some classes. So one of the most important things that students don't understand is panning, because they think everything is, I don't want to use the word mono, but it's such a close stereo where when you're hearing it in your car, when you're hearing it everywhere other than on your iPods or your headphones, you don't really understand stereo.
Yeah.
So everybody, when they're mixing, they don't even think about panning as a really important part of mixing placement.
Yeah. Are you a hard panner, or do you kind of like to find spots in between?
Both. I'm a hard panner and trying to keep it open, like stereo guitars. Not stereo guitars, because sometimes stereo guitars are really mono. But more like if there's two acoustic guitars and each acoustic guitars have two microphones on it, I don't keep it stereo like they send it to me, because they're both mono. I'll just put one on one side and one on the other side. And even with electric guitars, and then when I get my vocals in, then I kind of fine tune, because you really have the whole picture, but I still focus on my vocals as the center. So I try not to put too many things in the center.
Yeah. I know that you don't have so much time left, and I have a couple more questions I want to get to. I can't let you go without asking about the tone on Santana's record for his guitar tones, for the Supernatural. What do you remember? What went into that tone?
It's funny because some songs they were sent to him, and he just sent back a sound. So meaning he played a part and were sent to him. I did a song, I think it was on I forget, on a movie, that Olympics or something like that we did, where it was featured with Santana, with the producer Casey Porter. Then we sent him the track, and he did a guitar thing that was like, oh my gosh, what do we do with this thing? Not because it was bad, but it just sometimes, if they don't take things seriously, well, it's a Latin thing, no big deal, whatever. So I wasn't able to see what they did there, but again, long story short, when we did Corazon Espinado, we went up there and we recorded with Carlos. So I got a chance to see what he does. And he has a basic setup that pretty much is evened out. And right now he's using a PRS guitar. I think it's a Santana Special with a Dumble amplifier. So, I mean, that's a $30,000 amp. So, it's
Okay.
also Santana's tone, that comes out in the whole thing. Basically, it's a very, same kind of setup in terms of microphones. I don't remember back then if we used the Royers, the 121s, which is what I used, the 121 and a 57 combination. Back then we probably just used the 57. I'm not sure, but I think I used the Royers on there too. So he basically has his sound that comes out of that amplifier, and the only thing, like us engineers, our responsibility is just to capture what they give you, and kind of just work with that. So, and that worked out.
Yeah. And in the mix, do you remember anything special, or?
In the mix. Yeah, we mixed it at Conway Studios. I remember that. And the hard part about that song, because it was like a combination Cuban kind of feel. We had two or three different Cuban singers come in, sing. I think they're like a Corazón Espinado, the like backgrounds and kind of stuff. They wanted to give it a real Cuban sound to it, and none of it worked. So ended up the drummer Alex sang that song in like a Cuban kind of a feel. So yeah, that was it was fairly straight ahead. And I remember we were mixing this other album at the time, Sueños Líquidos, when they were writing Corazón Espinado, and they would go, man, we wrote a hit. Yeah, right. You never know what they're writing, but they were so excited about it. And when we started tracking, it was actually very cool. And when we went up there, I got to meet my idol, Santana. It's like, holy heck, having dinner with him, and he's talking about stuff. And my brain was just going, I'm talking to Carlos Santana. I'm talking to Santana. Oh my God. Had no idea what he was saying.
Wow, that must have been an amazing moment.
Yeah, it was.
Wait, so I want to ask you one more mixing question.
Mm-hmm.
You got all these songs have these like, that Latin percussion. Do you have any approach for mixing Latin percussion to make it sit nicely in the mix without overpowering, but like, I don't know, maintaining the groove?
Well, it's funny because you would think because it's Latin, it has to have percussion, or it has to have that Latin percussion feel, which is funny because when Manao, one time they were doing a live broadcast, actually in Mexico, and they hired union engineers, and they had this one guy from United States come down, and then at another time we did something at Jay Leno that they had me go there and kind of supervise, because you're not allowed to touch anything because it's union. And the first thing they said, exact same question, they said, so where the percussion? I said, it's a rock band. The percussion sits in the back. It's not a Spanish band. It's not a salsa band. My approach is to give it a groove. So the groove, if it's Manao, the important thing is the drummer and the bass player, and then the percussion just sits around it.
Right.
We had that issue with the song Mariposa Sintonero, whatever. It was a lot of percussion. It was very much that kind of feel. And we were having kind of discussions about, how high to put the cross stick and the kick as opposed to the shakers and bongos and that kind of stuff. So the approach really is more about fitting it into the groove of the song. Like Luis Conte, who's a great percussion player, played on a lot of those percussive parts. And, it's like any other, even on the American side, when you're listening to Jackson Browne or Steely Dan, they've got the conga, and it's more of something to kind of bring up or help the groove kind of a thing, as opposed to, you would think on the Latin side, it's got to be up in your face and loud because it's salsa. It's just part of the groove of that stuff. So that's the way I approach it. Is
you don't overthink it. It's just about the balance and getting it just right.
Exactly.
Just yeah. I love percussion because it really helps. It's almost like you're like on a boat on the water or whatever, just kind of grooving around, and it just kind of it helps lift up the whole energy.
Yeah, there's a lot of songs that you really don't realize unless you pay close attention that there's either a conga or percussion parts on there to help that out, even as much as just a shaker. All that kind of stuff.
That's one of my secret moves when I do productions is like, sometimes a shaker will just bring out the rest of, bring out the energy of the song, or a tambourine even. Yeah. Or, like that's the last, or an egg, one of these, like I have like these egg shakers.
Oh yeah. But that doesn't mean it's Latin. There's that exception. So that's why I would go in there and say, don't make the percussion too loud. It's still, the artist is still a band.
I was thinking of some of the like Luis Miguel, like ballads and stuff like that that you mixed. I was thinking about more about that side of things, but yeah.
And I would think of it exactly the same way, where you've got the drums and you've got the percussion is, the same part, the kind of like the same, all fitting together. I did
Yeah.
a few Brazilian records. Actually, in Portuguese, this guy Guto Melos, great producer, he wanted to integrate pop rock kind of stuff with Brazilian percussion. So he went to Bahia, which is like, you want to talk about, I think it's the capital of Brazil, where you walk outside, you grab anybody and they know how to play percussion. So, if you listen to like Brazilian, the carnival, all that great, that carnival kind of sound where they're coming down like a procession and there's all these uh, tambourine players and all that kind of stuff. So he got that, and then he came here and we recorded Vini Cagliuda, I think it was Abe Laboriel, and these kind of people where you kind of integrated that pop rock and that Brazilian. That was actually really cool. But it wasn't something that one was louder than the other. It was just like a whole part of the whole big sound.
A mosaic or a tapestry or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, but any technical question?
Oh yeah. So I mean, we could just go into your approach to mixing drums. I
Oh,
love the sound of your drums on you have, I
thank,
mean it's a total wide variety. Like, you have the rock sound with Mana, and you have that like that power ballad sound with a lot of those Latin singers, and
yeah.
like, I don't know, the drum sound huge on the Supernatural record. What's your approach to mixing drums? Like,
Wow. For some reason, drums were always a big part of what I do. I don't know why, but I love the bottom end of the bass and the whole deal. But the drums are just so, the punch and almost like the foundation. So I
yeah.
always start my mix with drums. And the bigger I can get the drums, the bigger I can get my mix,
Yeah.
in a way. So when we were recording in great studios and with Mana, and I would have the opportunity to spend the day to get drum sounds, and Alex would get a drum tech. We would get drums, whatever it took to get a good sound. And when we were doing studio records, you would bring in John Robinson or Greg Bissonette or Vinny Cagliuda or all these great players that they
Yeah.
would have great drum sounds. So you basically don't have to mess with it. All I would do is, EQ it or whatever. And I love API 550As.
Mm.
I use a lot of those. Even when I go to a Neve console, I'll rent APIs just to go through it and use that because of the punch and the
Yeah.
that bottom end that it gives me. So I would do that. But today, because we're only mixing, I get sent this stuff sometimes that, my God, it's coming from a living room or stuff like that. So unfortunately, it would have to be not resampling, but adding drums underneath it. I never redo or never take away the original, because that's be like taking away the feel of the drums. Obviously, I'm sure that the feel has to be good, or the drummer, or they spend 3 months editing the drums to make it fit right. Right.
Yeah.
So I've got like 4 or 5 kick sounds and 4 or 5 snare sounds that I'll throw into the song.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the kick, with those 5 sounds that I've got, I try and like find the sound that blends with the original kick, and then I'll copy paste, and then I'll do it manually. Write in the automation, so it kind of just gives me a bigger sounding kick, because sometimes if it's not recorded right, or if it's not a good sounding kick, no matter what you do, you're not gonna, you can only polish a turd, as they say, for so much.
Yeah.
But this
Yeah.
kind of thing kind of helps you not spend 10 hours like I used to get a good kick sound and a snare sound. So I add some of my samples, but to keep the sound of the original drums.
Yeah. Do you ever run into like phase alignment issues when you do that, or it seems
No,
to?
because I've got those 5 samples, already lined up. And the only phase issue I would have, like if you look in Pro Tools, if the snare starts
Going up.
going up and my samples go down, which usually, well, they're going up, but sometimes the recorded one goes down, I'll just phase reverse my samples.
Yeah.
I wouldn't phase reverse the original snare, because then that would phase out in the drum.
Right.
But yeah, sometimes I run into that, but it's not a big deal. The big deal usually is overheads, because if they're recording in a weird small room or whatever, and you hear the cymbal hit, it kind of like, even though it's on the right side, it'll kind of like swing back and forth in two mics because there's no air in the room. Those are the kind of things that there's not much you can do with it other than not use it, because you can't fix those kind of things. Or the room mics, where God knows why they're using room mics if it sounds so bad. I have to redo a room mic in terms of with my reverbs and stuff.
Yeah. Sometimes people just throw things up just because they can. So.
Well, because they think, oh, I got to. And I tell my students, one of the hardest things to record is a vocal, even with one mic. One of the easiest things to record is a string section, because once you've got your strings, your microphone set up and kind of the mic pre's evened out, once they sit in there, they balance themselves.
Right,
but
that's
with
true.
vocal, you can go from -15 to +30 in three phrases.
Yeah, vocals are definitely hard to record. Are you big on compression when it comes to, I guess, also vocals and also drum mixing?
Not so much big on it. I do use compression. I start more with conservative, just to kind of a combination of bring out some energy and even out the level, kind of a thing. But with vocals, I find more and more I am compressing a little more, like they used to in the early days, in the sense where it's up in your face, big, and all that stuff. But I kind of used to not do as much to try and keep it in the mix, kind of a thing. But ever since, I don't know, I'll show you here. Don't know if you can see right here, I've got an 1176.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yeah,
is
I see it.
a modified one where I've got two 1176s. I don't know if you can see it right here. Where is it? These are the these are the original ones. I use those original ones for sometimes snare or keyboards, pianos, that kind of stuff, really make it pop out. But with that 1176, even though it's a reissued, it sounds not as good a little bit as the old ones. But again, my friend Ben O'May, who's the head tech at Bernie Graham Mastering, he modified it to where it's very transparent. So I lose the sound of an 1176, which is what sometimes you want, but I gain the fact that I can overcompress and it's still very transparent. I don't hear it overly compressed. Cool. So I can get that level kind of a thing.
Almost like a VCA style or something.
Kind of, yeah. But I got to be careful, because if it's a singer, like if you do like an Adele or something like that, you don't want to compress that much. It's more like a pop rock kind of sound to it. Then I kind of back off. So I don't have like a specific, I'll just compress a lot. It depends on the genre, and because I do a lot of Latin, they'll send me pop, they'll send me rock, they'll send me ballads, different singers. It's not like on the American side where they kind of pigeonhole you. And if you're an engineer that does rock, everybody will send you rock music. They're not going to send you R&B, kind of a thing.
Right. I thought that was an LA thing, but
well, maybe it could be. I've been in LA too long. Yeah, but I don't know what's happening in Nashville, but there are engineers that are strictly recording certain things. So hip hop, you do rap, You're
Right.
not going to do country if you do rap kind of a thing. Even though you can, they pigeonhole you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. I'm in Jerusalem's like a pretty small city, so like a lot of what I get is like all over the place, and it when you're in a smaller city, that's kind of what seems to happen. I was talking to an engineer named Irko, who's also Italian, and he's in Los Angeles, and he's mixing some big hip hop records. And
Mhm.
he was saying he could, when he was in Italy, he had to do everything, and now once you're in LA, you can kind of really hyper focus on one thing, and that seems to be
Well, yeah, in a way.
the
Well,
way
it's
it
funny
goes.
when I was doing a lot of stuff. It's funny because in Argentina, for example, they would say, "Oh, we can't use." No, not in Argentina. In Mexico, well, we can't use Benny for rock stuff because he does Luis Miguel, which is all ballads and that kind of stuff. In Argentina, well, we can't use Benny for ballads because he does the Fabulous Cadillacs or whatever, which is rock. So you get pigeonholed in a way. Different countries, they say, "Well, this guy does rock, so he can't do this." This guy in this country, no, he does ballads, so you can't do rock. And one of the biggest singles was the Cadillacs, the song called Matador, which is actually one of my favorite all time, even though I'm never happy with my mix. One of the ones that I think that I was kind of happy with, put it that way. And it was a huge song, but that one was cool because of what we had to do with it. It was very much like it had surdos in there. It had a lot of percussion, and the beat was like dum 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 dum. But the drummer, who was part of the band, was doing that also. So we recorded the basic tracks at A&M Studio A, which is Henson, and we recorded the drums, and I used a lot of room sound. Then the surdos, it's like, how the hell do you get a surdo to stick out with the drums and with the bass and the rock kind of stuff? So I was able, because we were lucky in a big room, I used a lot of room mics and had a lot of perspective, and I was able to work, and I had to work my butt off to try and make all that stuff. I don't know
Wow.
if you get a hold of it to understand what I'm
I
saying.
have to look this up. I don't even know what a surdos is.
Usturos, one of those big bass drums.
Oh, I
Boom,
see it.
boom.
Yeah.
And in Brazilian music is like one of the main things that they have.
I see. It's a Brazilian. Yeah, it's a Brazilian. It's like a Brazilian, Brazilian,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
marching band kind of
Exactly, marching
thing.
band. Those guys doing that. But yeah, it's a very and they use that as their kick drum, but the combination
That's cool.
and the hard thing, because that surdo was very much part of the groove. If you listen to it loud, no problem listening to it. But how do you let something like a surdo stick out when you're listening to it low level or radio or that kind of stuff? That was a challenge.
What did you do to get it to stick
Well,
out?
it was about the compression, the EQ, the room, and how to space it out between the drums and the bass. Because I love bottom end, but I usually tend to do a lot of bottom end on my bass. I love
Right.
that bottom. I use an API here on my bass, and I have +6 at 50. Just have it no matter what, but it goes through a 160X compressor. So what happens is I'll be able to compress it. I lose a little bit of the bottom end because of the sound of the 160X compressor. But when it comes back on the console, I'll add another couple of dB at 50. I just love bottom end.
Yeah, I'm a bass player, so I'm with you. I tend to put the kick drum below the bass usually when I'm mixing. Like I'll usually have like the bass in the 100, and the kind of area, and the kick will be more in the 60. But sounds like you like to do the other way around.
Well, the funny thing is I'll do my kick at 50 also. I don't do it at 100 because to me 100 is a little too, still has that muddiness to it.
Yeah.
So I'm able
It's not low enough.
Well, not that it's not low enough. It's just it enables me to add more bottom end. And once I take sometimes out on the kick at 400, it'll give more of a rounder sound. So that'll stick out. And remember, when you add at 50, you're still adding at 100 with that slope.
Yes.
So if for some reason it doesn't make a muddy bottom end when I stay with 50 and not at 100. Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of other things, like I'll crank 150 on the toms.
Wow.
So, it all depends. But I've always, and again, on bass, I have an API 550, and I just put maybe, 2 dB at 50, but I'll have those samples to support the kick.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Yeah, bottom end is awesome. And I love that it's more in vogue now also, because now all the big records are having a lot more blow in than they used to.
well,
But
that's
your records from the 80s sound massive, like compared to what was going on in a lot of the rock stuff. So
Oh, wow. Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
yeah.
But I have no idea if I'm still relevant today.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, things change. When reggaeton came into Spanish, it was like, well, you can't do reggaeton because you don't live in Colombia or Puerto Rico. So no, there's no way you can do that. Not that I wanted to do it, but people do think you can't do something because you do something else. Back to that pigeonhole thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I know you're towards the end of your allotted time. So I'll just
That's okay.
can I ask you 2 questions?
Of course.
All right. So these are kind of like 2 questions I ask everybody on the show. So just like creative energies, we all have days where we're super pumped to get in the studio and work, and there's days where we're a little bit less energized. Do you have any creative practices or not creative practices, but practices to kind of stay energized and help you feel jazzed to get in the studio?
Definitely. Well, in the beginning, if I was mixing or anything, obviously, we would go to different studios to mix, to do whatever. So even though I was familiar with Conway, Ocean Way, all these places, you have to go in there and kind of get a feel for it again, even if we brought our own speakers. So I would always listen to a few CDs at the time and just kind of get into listening to music. And one of my favorite records was Hell Freezes Over, the Eagles. For whatever reason, when I was mixing Ricky Martin stuff, I would listen to some of those songs because it was kind of similar. It had some ballads, it had pop. So it just kind of get me in the groove of, trying to, when I sit down and I want it to sound as great as that, for whatever. So that was my motivation. And after a while, when that became like we were always in the same place, I'd bring my own equipment, my own speakers, my own amplifier, that when we would go into the studio, the first thing we would do, we wouldn't sit down right away. Go have a coffee, talk a little bit, kind of, ease into the work, where you just sit around. And even though it wasn't a home studio, it was, you go to the lounge, you'd have a coffee, talk for 10 minutes, then, okay, well, let's go to work. And you sit down and then you work, and then, you take a break, that kind of stuff. As opposed to now, you go in a home studio, it's like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'll be right back. I got to talk to my wife for about 20 minutes and, hold off. And, oh, damn, I got a phone call. So I'll be back in whatever. Hey, let's go to lunch. My wife made me lunch or whatever. So it's a little different, but easing into it, just to sit down and, okay, let's start. Even now, when I come into, this is basically, I built my room. I never talked about the acoustical side. It's totally soundproof.
Yeah, I can hear it. I can hear it.
Okay.
Like even through the Zoom, I can hear how balanced it sounds.
And the funny thing is, it wasn't expensive because I basically took the concept of, I did a lot of mastering. Sorry, I moved out of that question.
Go wherever you want to go.
At Bernie Grumman Mastering, I loved their panels, their acoustical panels. And whenever even my other places where I rented studio space, I made my own panels. And by that meaning, I'd have a carpenter build the 2x4, and I just threw stuff in there. Back then, I would put fiberglass 902 or 903, which is really thick and whatever. But when I built this, and this basically my garage, that the guy at Bernie Grumman told me, we don't put fiberglass. We put, like, it's a type of pillow foam. kind of a thing, because fiberglass kind of darkens it up, and all of a sudden you walk in a room and it sounds like you have hands over your ears, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
This will keep it alive, but contained, so I can hear everything here. Not only that, but they're round.
Yeah.
They're not flat. He says, that helps. So I took that kind of idea, and then the ceiling, I had a whole bunch of fiberglass and tried to make it dead. He goes, no. I took it all off, and basically my ceiling, you probably can't see it, but all it is a packing blanket that I stapled, and then I went to a fabric store, bought fabric, and just put black fabric over it.
Yeah. So it's like a very dead, sound, like that 70s thing almost.
Well, the thing is, the acoustics are really important in any studio you go to or mixing. If the acoustics aren't right, you don't know what kind of a mix you've got.
Yes, totally.
Did I answer the question before I got into the acoustics?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, just about like taking a minute, inspiration before you get in the studio to, have stay inspired.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going somewhere with it, but
yeah, I think maybe you're talking about just like what it's like now in home studios and how do you stay. Yeah.
But the thing is, with what I was going to say with this is that, people don't realize how cheap it is to do this kind of stuff. It's not expensive. Just by using packing blankets on walls, make your workspace so much better, that people don't realize that.
Yeah, I'm in a very small room, and I had it acoustically treated, and it's basically like the thickest possible mattress foam that they have, and it's like plastered all over the walls, and I have a lot of it in front of my computer screen and in between my speakers and like the front wall.
Yeah.
And also behind me underneath that blanket.
Yeah.
And so it works amazing.
Yeah.
It's great. It's crazy how much bass
it
absorbs.
So long as whatever it sounds like in there, when you take it out, it sounds the same. That's the purpose.
Yes. Exactly. The translation is everything. Amazing. Well, I just have one final question for you. Time based on the time. Yeah. So I asked this to everybody on the show. Looking back on your journey, and you may have already answered it, to be honest, but looking back on your journey, was there something that you did or didn't do that you'd want to impart on maybe a listener who's maybe more early on in their career of, hey, that was something I did right, or that was something I probably should have done that held me back? What would be like that one piece of advice?
Are you talking about mixing or just in general?
It could be anything. Yeah, anything that comes to mind. It could be, just finding success in this journey of audio.
My one regret in this journey, whatever I want to call it, is that I didn't enjoy the moment, because it's always about the work and the stress and the pressure of getting it right. But wow. I never really enjoyed or took the time to enjoy the process and just go day by day, because when I would do a project, I would so worry about the final outcome that I didn't get to enjoy the process. That is one of my biggest problems. And same thing when we travel, when I fly out to, Rio de Janeiro and work for 2 weeks, I didn't say, you know what, let me stay an extra few days and enjoy the city. No, I wanted to rush home because, it's work. So never really stop and kind of enjoy the process of what I was doing. It's a little different now because you're in your own house. You wake up, you make your cup of coffee. And if I wasn't teaching, I teach full time at Cal Lutheran University now. If I didn't go there, I wouldn't even have a reason to get dressed in a way. Come with your coffee, sit down here, and okay, whatever. But so it's a different thing. But there was so much happening back then that I think it's happening a little bit now, where music is a collaboration, and it's so much fun going into a studio or going places with and collaborating with other musicians, whether it's songwriting, tracking, mixing, whatever. Now we're so alone that it's like an author writing a book, and it's lonely, where it shouldn't be that way. Music is about collaborating. That's what what I didn't enjoy at the time, and more than anything else, because everything else, you do what you do, you're doing it, and people like, because they hire you to do what you do because they like what you do, but you have to like it also.
Yeah.
Then it's the
Wow.
business side of it.
Yeah. That's such a strong yeah, sentiment. Like that's a big regret. I feel like
Yeah.
I think, I don't know. I come from like this American Jewish kind of productive background, like in New York, and it's something that I'm fighting. I'm constantly fighting of just like, let's just enjoy this moment. Let's just be here, present. And
Yeah.
because it's like there's this, maybe it's like an American thing. It's like in the back of your head, like, oh, I should be productive. I should be productive. Yeah, like I really related to that sentiment of like, oh, I'm in like Rio de Janeiro, and like I just got to get back to work. Like I've been there, and that's something that I've been trying to
Yeah.
not do anymore. But it's hard, Like I think so many of us suffer from that kind of like always feeling like we need to be doing more or moving on to the next thing, and yeah, trying to enjoy the journey while we're at it is so important. Yeah, I really relate to that, and hopefully we can all sort of,
Yeah.
appreciate the time while we have it, and the people that are around us, and the experiences that we're having.
Yeah. Well,
So
the funny thing is, just to kind of finish that question, is when we're really doing this stuff, even though it's music, but it is a business, and I was always relating to this work as the only way to get my next work. So if I didn't do this right, the next one might not come my way, kind of a thing. So
yeah,
again, that kind of stopped me also enjoy the process of the whole thing, of enjoying, what I want to do at that time. So um I don't know. I mean, I just, there's so many, when the business part comes in, what happens is I start to worry financially. So, I got to make this perfect, because financially, you're always working with your next project. It's not like, you're a songwriter where all of a sudden you get your $2 million royalty check. Here, as engineers, as mixers, those points are gone. There's no such thing. Even if it is, there's nothing. So you're really working paycheck by
yeah,
paycheck in a way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's tough. Wow. Looking back, like, do you think you could have afforded yourself to chill out a bit more and to have taken it a bit easier, or is that just the way business was done?
Well, I somebody said we have immigrants mentality, where if we're not working, we're freaking out. So as an independent, anybody, you worry when you're working, and you worry when you're not working.
Yeah,
That is a big problem.
yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also an immigrant.
Well,
Gone the other direction in the
yeah,
Atlantic.
but immigrants, like my parents, a lot of immigrants' mentality is it's about working, and you just do what you have to do to
Yes.
make a living, and to do this, if I said no to the next job, who knows when the next one would be? So saying no is never really an option.
Yeah.
And in
Now
a
that
way,
I'm thinking about it, it's like the same thing as the Jewish community in New York, right? Like it's that
yeah,
immigrant's mindset.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then also, you also have to negotiate what kind of, when you're talking about rates and money and that kind of stuff. So in our business, where it's not like there's unions and set rates, you charge whatever you can, and whatever they pay, and they'll either accept you or go with somebody else. And can you afford, with the rate that you charge, to lose that job? Or do you charge less because I don't want to lose that job?
Yeah.
Unless you have a manager. But managers, I never really had one, because all they care about is like getting you as much as possible. But can you afford not to have this job because you're charging too much? There's very few engineers, mixers, producers that can really do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You have to know if you're there. It's hard to
Right.
know, I guess.
Right.
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
Yeah. I guess everybody's got to figure that out for themselves.
Philosophical stuff. It's always that really works 50% of, your job is trying to do that. Kind of related is when I would talk to studio players, that they would say, hey, 50% of my work is my talent. The other 50% is my sound. So it's same kind of concept. It's not only about your performance, it's about what you bring to the table to these people, and bring it to the table. Sometimes you think you're doing an amazing job, and people are going, "My, this guy sucks." You never know. It's like music is so objective, in terms of one person likes it, one person hates.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things going on. Why I never really enjoyed the moment.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, there's so many variables, and yeah, like you said, it's all so subjective. And
yeah.
Oh, well, Benny, this has been so fun. I really learned a ton, and this was so fun, and it was just an honor to get to chat with you. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, appreciate it. And one day I'd love to look out your window and see Jerusalem.
Yeah, well, if you're ever here, I'd love to take you out for hummus. So,
oh, okay.
or a falafel, whatever you prefer.
Oh, both.
All right.
I'm an Italian eater. I'll eat it all.
All right. I'll take you to a good place. Yeah, thank you so much for doing it. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Secret Sonics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you've been digging the show, it would be awesome if you could share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend or two, and or leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher of choice. That's it for now. Have a great week. Take care and dig in. See you soon. Bye-bye.